Now, today is May Day, though for obvious reasons there's not quite the same number of rallies around the world because of the coronavirus lockdowns, but that's not stopping everybody from making their voices heard. There have been some protests on the street, as you can see there in Athens, everyone donning a face mask. Others are using social networks or chanting slogans from their balconies to get their messages across. Well, for more on how Labour Day is being observed, we can speak now to Paul Smith, who's an Associate Professor of French and Francophone Studies at the University of Nottingham. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Ordinarily, the French will be venting their grievances out on the streets on the 1st of May. Those grievances obviously still exist. It's just that they can't go outdoors. What would you identify the principal grievances as being here in France right now?
Well, I think that what the coronavirus crisis has underlined in France is our issues of health and safety at work, in particular. With the talk of relaxing the lockdown from the 11th of May, there's a lot of focus on just how safe it will be for people to go back to work, whether that's in schools or in factories or in offices that have been closed. And so very much the focus is still on, people who can work at home, still working at home. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. And I guess that's kind of putting, kind of refocusing thoughts, not just on the situation as it is in terms of health and safety, but more broadly, the way that employers treat their employees. And that's certainly the message that's coming out from some of the trade unions today, that we want to think about our demands in that way. I mean, there are other demands that are in the background as well, that are issues that are coming into the crisis, but that's certainly a thing that trade union leaders will want to focus on.
OK, and of course, a lot of us here in France are working from home. Obviously, I'm not at this particular moment, but lots of other people are. Télétravail is obviously the new norm here in France. But how does that work with a protest? I mean, how do people who want to get their messages across, the messages you just identified, go about doing that, given the lockdown?
Well, there's been, you mentioned in the lead into the report, this idea of going out on balconies and banging saucepans and making a noise and holding up placards and blankets with things written on them. So that's happening. There have been some small protests in Marseille. I was watching some footage earlier, but I think the problem is that for this kind of process that it's actually quite difficult to actually focus it, as you were saying. May the 1st is an important celebration of work, but the actual idea of the bank holiday that it should be is so blurred now, because everybody, or very few people, are able to work, that actually it's kind of just merging into one. So the celebrations of it are quite muted. We've seen some activity on Facebook and on Twitter, but it's very difficult to get that out there into the public domain.
Of course, the 1st of May is celebrated ordinarily right across the globe. I mean, here in France, it seems to be particularly significant. And I'm just wondering if you agree with that, and then perhaps why that might be in that case.
Well, it's not just, yes, you're right. It's not just the festival of, the celebration of work. It's a traditional kind of date at which the French mark the beginning of spring. As you will know, in Paris, it's traditionally, this is when you buy and you give a sprig of lily of the valley, what the French call muguet. There was some controversy yesterday when florists thought they were going to be allowed to actually sell their muguet, and then the government said no, they couldn't. And that's been a big disappointment. So the 1st of May is not just it's not sort of just Labour Day. It's also about marking the beginning of May. The muguet, the lily of the valley, is a symbol of hope and regeneration. So there's that's also bound up with that. So that's why it's also important to the French, the 1st of May, as a moment.
OK, I did see a lot of people at the supermarket yesterday buying a little sprig of muguet, no doubt with that in mind, the fact that florists are still closed. Thank you very much for speaking to us. We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Paul Smith at the University of Nottingham. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Now, there's